Nearly all plants, there are a few exceptions, but nearly all plants require the exact same nutrients and use them in the exact same way. There are a few exceptions. Carnivorous plants, for one, plants that consume insects, they're different. But orchids, cacti, succulents, tropical plants, they all use the same nutrients and use them in the same way. When you see a all-purpose fertilizer, nearly always that means you're going to have all of these nutrients that I'm going to be talking about in that fertilizer because it's an all-purpose fertilizer. But not to be confused with a balanced fertilizer. We do not want to use a balanced fertilizer in our potted plants. When they say it's a balanced fertilizer, they're talking about the primary nutrients. That's nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Those are the three numbers that they usually display front and center on the package. And if it's a balanced fertilizer, that might be something like a 10-10-10. And what balanced means is that those primary nutrients are in equal parts. And we do not want to give our plants these primary nutrients in equal parts. The reason for that is plants require 3 times as much nitrogen as they have phosphorus. And the potassium, that last number, needs to be at a minimum somewhere in between those first two numbers. Basically, what you want to do is you want to look at that middle number, multiply that by 3, and that's what you want the first number to be. And that last number, you want that to be at a minimum in between those first two numbers, because that is the ratio at which the plant needs those nutrients to be. Now, the nitrogen, that first number. Nitrogen, we're told that's for nice healthy foliage, and that's true. But actually, the leaf requires nitrogen in it because nitrogen is what is required to produce chlorophyll. That's what the nitrogen is doing for our houseplants. Primarily, it is being used to produce chlorophyll. And chlorophyll is what is inside the leaf that is absorbing the light and using that light and creating energy to engage in photosynthesis. And the second number, the phosphorus, that is primarily used for photosynthesis. If you have that second number the same as the first number, if you have just as much phosphorus as nitrogen, you're going to have a nitrogen deficiency. And the plant is not going to be able to engage efficiently in photosynthesis. That third number, potassium, is primarily used for the immune system, which helps protect your plant from things like disease. Also used for regulating and moving water and nutrients throughout the plant, which is how the plant protects itself from cold weather or hot weather. And it is how the plant, it uses that in a way that helps the plant to protect its root system from drought when the roots happen to be in overly dry soil. So nitrogen, that's basically the building blocks of the plant, and it works in conjunction with the phosphorus. And the potassium, that's the protector of the plant. Those are the three primary nutrients of a plant. Just remember to have a ratio of 3, 1, 2. Multiply that second number, the phosphorus, by 3 to know how much nitrogen the plant's going to be requiring. And then somewhere in between those two numbers, you want a minimum of somewhere in between those two numbers of potassium. That number can be higher. You just don't want it to be below the average of the first two. So those are the primary nutrients, the one the plant consumes the most of. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about the difference between organic fertilizers and synthetic fertilizers. Basically, an organic fertilizer is just potting mix that is comprised of a lot of organic material, which is dead and decaying organic material. It can be pine needles, leaves, bark, anything organic that has died and is decomposing within the soil. Those organic materials that are in the soil for an organic fertilizer, that's actually not the fertilizer. That's not the nutrients. You got to have beneficial organisms within the soil, fungus, bacteria, and even really tiny insects that you can't even see that are in the soil, and they are consuming that dead organic material. They're eating that, and their waste is then consumed by even smaller beneficial organisms in the soil. They eat that waste, and then their waste is smaller yet, and that just keeps happening until these organic materials are broken down to a microscopic size or to the molecular level where they're small enough that when we water the plant, these nutrients are absorbed into the water, and then when the roots suck up the water, they're getting water that is nutrient rich. When using an organic fertilizer or an organic soil, you really want that organic material to be comprised of various sizes. You want there to be, some big chunky pieces like orchid bark. I use orchid bark. It's big, it's chunky, and that will take a long time to break down. It's feeding that beneficial life in the soil for a long time. If you're using a well-aged manure or a well-aged compost where it's already broken down to a level where it looks just like regular soil, you don't see no chunky material in there, that's not going to last as long in a pot compared to a soil with the larger, more chunky stuff. And what will happen is, as those organisms feed on that and break it down, it can begin to compact. And then if that compacted, dense material overly dries out, even after you rehydrate it, it can be kind of hard. It will still be dense, and the roots can have a hard time growing through it, and it can retain too much water. It won't drain as quickly or as well as you would want it to. So I would always recommend making sure you have some nice chunky material in there, as well as to add some perlite to make sure that over time it is still well draining, and that perlite will provide little air pockets, which is great for aeration because you need oxygen in your soil to keep your roots healthy. Synthetic fertilizers, all that is that is the exact same compounds that you're going to get, the exact same nutrients that you're going to get when organic material breaks down. When the organic material breaks down to a molecular level, to a microscopic size, it is exactly the same as what we are giving it with synthetic fertilizers. It's just that the synthetic fertilizer has already been broken down to that size so that when you add the nutrients, it is immediately available for the plant. Perhaps you're using just organic soil with organic fertilizers, but you then have a deficiency. Well, you need to add fresh organics to that soil so that it can start getting broken down to release those nutrients. But that's going to take some time, and it's not going to immediately solve the deficiency problem. You would want to add fresh organics, but also use a synthetic fertilizer so that you're immediately dealing with that issue and giving time for those new organics to be able to be broken down, for them to decompose so that those microorganisms can do their job. So this video here is basically a shortened or a summarized version of a longer video that I put together on fertilizing houseplants. And in that video, I got into a lot more detail about the nutrients, as far as the secondary nutrients and the trace elements that plants need and how they use them, as well as what we can do to make sure and to ensure that we have a large enough colony of those beneficial organisms within our pots to supply not only a steady but also a adequate amount of nutrients for the plants to encourage and maintain nice healthy growth. And I'll put a box up in the corner if you're interested in that to click on that. And also I do have a playlist on how I care for my plants. It's Tropical Houseplants, Tips and Tricks. Check that out if you're interested in what I'm doing here in order to get these plants to look as nice and lush as I do. Thank you, and don't forget, I call the channel the Jungle Nook.